So America is drawing a line in the ocean. It's their line of defense against China, military defense. But what about financial defense? That could be trickier. China is the only serious threat to America's military power. But their economic power is a different story altogether. Everyone wants a piece of it. And their biggest target? The US dollar. By the way, India is on the same mission, to reduce its dependence on the US dollar. Instead, India wants to use the rupee. And on Saturday, that mission got a huge boost. Prime Minister Modi was in the UAE for an official visit. After the talks, both sides made an announcement. They decided to establish a system to trade in local currencies, basically a rupee dirham trade. How would that work? Well, normally bilateral trade is done in US dollars. It's widely accepted all over the world. It's backed by the US economy, and it's easy to exchange the dollar. So buying and selling with the US dollar makes sense. But India and the UAE are planning to remove the dollar from this equation. So Indian importers will be able to buy using rupees, and Emirati importers will be able to buy in dirhams. How does it help us? For starters, you won't use up a lot of your reserves. Those dollars can be safe in your bank. So more forex stability. And secondly, things will be less volatile. Your import bill will no longer depend on the US dollar, which is the situation right now. If the dollar rises, so will your import expenditure. Your bill goes up. You end up paying more for the same thing. The rupee dirham trade can reduce this volatility. The dollar's tantrums won't affect you, at least not as much. And India is pushing this strategy with multiple partners. Banks from 18 countries have opened special accounts in India. These include Germany, the UK, Israel, Malaysia, and Russia. So the system is very much in place. The question is how many countries are using it? Bangladesh and Sri Lanka have expressed interest. So has Indonesia now. Their finance minister is in India for G20 talks. Both countries are looking at creating a rupiah trade. Rupiah is the currency of Indonesia. Indian officials say African and Gulf nations are also keen on the rupee. The key is to translate this interest into deals, to sign more local currency agreements with various countries. But that's easier said than done. Look at the rupee-ruble trade, for instance. India and Russia wanted to trade in their own currencies, the rupee and the ruble. Politically, it made sense. But financially, it did not. We buy a lot from Russia, but the Russians don't buy as much from us. So Moscow would have ended up with a huge pile of unusable rupees, which is why the talks are stalled. But India is not giving up. This deal with the UAE could be the boost that the rupee needs. And there are three reasons for that. One, there's a lot of money at stake. India-UAE trade is almost $85 billion. It is growing at 20% annually, so 100 billion is not really far off. Now, even if some of this trade is done in rupees, it will be a lot of money. Reason number two, the fuel bill. UAE is India's fourth biggest source of oil. They sell around 200,000 barrels per day. Imagine if we could buy all of that oil in rupees. Think about how much we could save in dollar reserves. And reason number three, the remittance factor. Around 3 million Indians live in the UAE. They have to send money back home. The rupee dirham trade could help them by reducing the transaction cost, by reducing the settlement time, meaning you can send money faster and at better rates. And I know all of this sounds wonderful, but like with the ruble, there are challenges. You see, India has a huge trade deficit with the UAE, around $15 billion, which means we buy a lot more than we sell them. Most of it is oil. So will the UAE agree to using the rupee? Or will they also backtrack like Russia? And that is a big concern. There's some good news on that front, though. I mentioned that India has a trade deficit with the UAE. That was not always the case. Between 2014 and 2017, India, in fact, had a trade surplus with them. We sold more than we bought. So the goal is to reach that level again. Then the UAE will be more than happy, in fact, to take the rupee. And things are looking good on that front. They're on the right trajectory. India and the UAE signed a free trade agreement last year. Experts say Indian exports are set to double by 2027. If that happens, the rupee dirham trade could also flourish. But what about beyond the UAE? This is where things get a bit tricky. Ideally, India would want to use rupees when there is a deficit, because they can save dollar reserves. But those countries are not always willing. Case in point, Russia. Then you have countries with a trade surplus like Bangladesh or Nepal or Sri Lanka. Those countries are more than willing to use local currencies, but in these cases, India may not agree. Take Bangladesh, for example. Their exports to India are around $2 billion, but their imports are around $14 billion. So Bangladesh's deficit with India is $12 billion. Now, assume this trade was done in rupees and takas, the Bangladeshi currency, taka. Will India be willing to accept $14 billion worth of Bangladeshi takas? We only need $2 billion for trade. What will we do with the rest? That's the problem with trading in local currency. You need to strike deals with dozens of countries, some with deficits, some with a surplus. Only then can you internationalize the rupee. New Delhi has certainly scored a big win by getting the UAE on board, but the key is to build on this momentum.